5.
Okay. And the other two people at the table, thank you, with me, if they'd introduce themselves, please.
Chief Brian Wheelis.
Thank you.
Captain Jamie Holton.
Thank you. Thank you. And we'd like to welcome some of our special guests that are also on Zoom. Dr. Tiffany Anderson, I think it's, I'm sorry, there's like a glare, I believe it's, and I wanted to say Councilman Nave, but he's a former councilman, John Nave. Okay, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to call the meeting to order. I've done that. We're going to approve the minutes from February the 19th.
And an amended copy of the minutes that were originally sent out was just delivered to people's desks here. The only change, if people looked at it earlier, is that Captain Halton was not at the last meeting, but got credit for being present. And there was a minor change in one quote on page 3. So unless somebody wants me to go over it, I'll move to approve the minutes as delivered.
Okay, it's been moved and
I'll second.
you'll second. It's been moved and amended, and now it's slated for approval. All those in favor, raise your right hand. That's 3-0. Okay, next, I'd like to, our agenda calls for presentation from the Governor's Commission, and I'm going to hold off on that. I'm going to slide in the presentation, Stay Calm presentation, because that's not going to take probably nearly as long as the governor's. So next, I would ask, I'll turn it over to you, Chief. How do you want to present this?
I think we would call the innovator of the program up to the microphone and let him roll it out, and we would be happy to assist him if he needs any further assistance.
Okay. I would just like to say that there's no favoritism going on, but Brother Craig, I call him my brother in Christ, is a near and dear friend to me, and he got me a shirt about 2 months ago, so I just pulled it out. If you can introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Craig Johnson. I spent 30 years in this building here. Well, yeah, 30 years. So I'm glad to be back. That just lets you know I'm still concerned with what goes on in our community. Thanks, Captain Halton and Chief and everybody for inviting me here. What we have is a Stay Calm holder. You probably want to know how we got it started. Well, several years ago, my brother-in-law's cousin got killed by a police officer in Dallas, Texas. And then I told him that this don't happen in Topeka, Kansas. And I come back and we had this shooting here, which I don't think there's much correlation between the two, but we kind of understand that whether citizens or whoever needs to stay calm, stop, and listen. So we come up with this, and our biggest product, what we want to use it for, is like elderly people can use it at their house. You know, if EMS comes into their house, the first thing EMS will probably look at is something that's going to jump out and hit them. And we put them in our cars. And if you have an accident and you're incapacitated, this is probably the first thing EMS or police officer will look at, I would think anyway. It's other than that, we're very proud of the program. It's going real good. You know, people like them in Texas, and a lot of people are starting to like them around here. And I really like the police department for kind of understanding that and supporting this, because it's so easy for citizens to look at and say, hey, let's do this. The biggest thing about Stay Calm, and I don't know if this is where we want to go with it, I don't think the citizens in Topeka really have an issue with police. I think it's the whole government. But we as police, that's who they address their issues to. They have nowhere else to go. They can't go to the governor's office. They can't go to the city manager's office. So you guys are the first people to be receptive to them. So that's what we need to get these people to understand. And we're hoping that through Stay Calm, we can get some dialogue going and people starting to understand that, hey, we're not the bad guys. And we just want to push this, and hopefully, you know, I'm a lifelong resident of Topeka. And for some reason, I've been on the internet here the last 2 or 3 years. But I see Topeka as one of the highest crime rates in the state of Kansas, and our population is going down, and I don't like that. You know, I think we talked about economics. Well, I think if we come together as a team and start trying to bring our crime down, I think we'll bring economics, and people will move back here. I know we're recognized for the Brown versus board, but why can't we be recognized as a city that's reaching out to people and communicating with people and trying to get them to understand where we're coming from? I don't think I have anything else. Any questions?
Craig, can you talk a little bit about like what's in the orange packet? I know that there's a lot, you know, we talked about they jump out when they're pulled over. Officers are recognizing them. How long's the program been in place?
I think we started this in 2018.
Okay.
And what's on the back, I don't know if you want to read what's on the back or...
Go ahead.
It's just got a few items that, to me, when I was out on the streets and dealing with this, these were things that we all looked at. I'm sure these guys have looked at it too. You know, be calm. Do not panic. Do not run. Do not argue. No sudden movements. Roll down your windows if your windows are tinted. Turn on your interior light. You know, do not offer information. Document contact. Get names and addresses of witness. Keep hands visible. Only the driver talks. Only talk when addressed. I think and those are things that I think is going to keep you safe, and everybody else do. If you do that, you know, if you got a problem with an officer, okay, go home. Tell your parents, tell somebody, and let them come down and deal with these guys. I mean, that's the proper way to do it. Because out on the streets, when I was there, you can't win on the street normally. Because too much is going on, so.
And Craig, you were one of our TPD officers for how many years? Do you know?
30.
30 some years? Okay. You have any?
I loved every minute of it.
You loved every minute of it.
Well, the other thing that we were talking about the other night, you know, with some friends is that, you know, with the Stay Calm, I was part of the crisis response unit, the mental health unit here. And what was so beneficial, and I think these guys know, that, you know, we talk to people when they were out of crisis, usually. And if we talk to them, officers on the street, officers on the street don't have time to do it. But we did it, and we were repetitive with them. And most times we won that battle, and that's what I liked about that unit, is that we did help a lot of people. And how do we get to the point to where there's probably just not enough resources out here, but if we can get citizens to stay calm, and just talk and communicate, I think we win a lot of battles. And I think it'd be a lot easier on the whole city. And that's what I want. I've been here for 33 years, so, 66 years. And I just wanted to, you know, you can walk around, you don't have to always look over your shoulder, and you don't have to hear people say, well, I'm sorry. Well, I don't accept I'm sorry anymore. You know, do something about it. So that's why we came up with this. All right.
Any other questions? Councilman Padilla, followed by Karen, or Karen, followed by Padilla. Ladies first, he's saying.
Well, I just wanted to help you out on your story a little bit, because you mentioned the two uses, keeping, particularly for seniors, but for anybody to keep their documents at home in a place where it was easy to find. And I think I've even heard it suggested that this be like, put it on your fridge with a magnet or something like that, so it's really easy to find. And then you mentioned in a car, if there's an accident and you're disabled, someone could find it easily. What really sold me on it was the idea of having it in the car when you just plain got pulled over, and because you're nervous and so on, and that a lot of times what escalates a situation is that somebody's fumbling around trying to find their papers, and it makes it an awkward situation and builds the stress, and that by having something like this with your insurance and your registration in your glove box, if you ever were pulled over, it's just real easy to see it, to find it, pull out one thing, so you're not looking for your billfold on the floor and getting in trouble, or fumbling around like somebody thinks you're trying to just stall or something like that. So that's what sold me the most on this, and I do have it in my glove box. I think, trying to figure out something that makes our lives easier, and that helps me stay calm, but I think a lot of people, that was my favorite part about your invention, if you will, and so I wanted to point that out and thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I don't think you need any help telling your story. I mean, we all know your story, everybody who is familiar with the work that you've done with the police department. What I want to do is compliment you, Craig. You and I have been friends for a long time. We've talked about a lot of things. What I like about this approach is that it was an idea blossomed from your familiarity with the police department, of working, seeing the issues that come up and how they might be mitigated by offering another way to communicate, even in a nonverbal way, but in a way that immediately tells law enforcement that the person that they're making contact with is providing the information that's going to be necessary to help them in their situation. And my compliment is to you, because you're a prime example of a private citizen who has gone way beyond the extra mile to find out the facts and then come up with something that helps an agency that, that wasn't your primary employment, but that was your primary interest, I believe.
Yeah.
And you showed that through all that time. And so I encourage people to look to you as a role model, to find other ways to help themselves when they have contact with law enforcement, or in any situation that requires communication where they need aid, like with medical aid, those kinds of things. So I think it's refreshing to see us to look to someone else for a solution to some of the problems, because I think that's important to get everybody's ideas. So my compliments to you, and thank you again. I still have the first one you gave me too. Thank you.
Are there any more, Captain? Or, I'm sorry,
That's
Chief?
all right. And the deputy mayor said it much more eloquently than I will be able to, but I think all those kudos that he just gave you are well deserved. And to that, I would just add to you that, yeah, obviously we could use as many private citizens like you in this community as we can get. But I also wanted to add, I know I speak for Captain Haltham on this too, that after all these years, you're still teaching us lessons. And we appreciate that.
You guys taught me a lot of lessons too, I've seen, both of you guys come up, and I watch you grow, and it's the passion you had for the job, I mean, I work with both of you guys, and it was not about the arresting somebody or whatever. It's how you treated somebody. That wins, more with anybody else, anything that goes on. You treat people like you want to be treated. And I've learned while watching you guys. I know I was an old man out there, but still, I sit back and I knew where you guys were going. And, congratulations to you guys both, and you're going to go a long way.
And these are available at the police department. Where else are they available, Craig?
On the website.
Okay.
And the schools have these too, and the students like them, and a lot of the administrators really like them. They see the need for it because, you know, as they're growing up, you know, a lot of the problems we have, you know, we put it on kids, but a lot of it's the adults, you know, and we need to think that. And when I talk to people, I tell them, you know, it's part of my fault because it's a learned behavior by some of the way some of these kids are happening. And I think if we start addressing that, I think we'll resolve this real quick. Okay.
Captain Holman, do you have anything?
You know, I just like to point out, not to make you stand there any longer, but, you know, this is, to some, this may seem, you know, like a simple offering or a simple solution, but this is the type of outside-the-box thinking in a simple format that is huge. We talked a little bit about the citizens staying calm during traffic stops, but this is a tool that helps the officers stay calm as well. You know, we don't like to use the word routine traffic stop because there's nothing routine about a traffic stop. There's a great deal of unknowns. And this helps, this becomes a known during that traffic stop. What is that citizen reaching for at 2 o'clock in the morning when it's dark outside and I can't really see inside that car very well? Well, that bright orange envelope, at least that's one known in that car stop. And I know what information it leads me to believe that there's cooperation going on. There's going to be the information that I need to conduct that traffic stop. So, you know, I commend you for the outside the box thinking that it is a tool that benefits us as well. So thank you.
We're gonna win this battle. We're gonna win this battle. There's a lot going on. The police department's got a lot of things going on. The city council got a lot of things going on. City manager's office that I know of. And we want our Stay Calm program to work with all of these programs. We're not trying to take over or do anything. And the other thing that we like about our program is non-bias in any kind of way. It touches everybody. I don't care about your economic status, social status, or what. It touches everybody. And we like that, you know, be non-biased.
And you're so right. There's not an age limit on it. I talked to Craig yesterday and to confirm he'd be here, and he said, your buddy likes this, and my buddy's, what, 70-something years old? And her husband, they have it in their car.
We got shirts too.
There's no race on this. This is a one-size-fit-all. There's no gender on this. That's what I like about it. So I hope, and I was glad that you came today to make awareness of this, and I hope people would get a hold of the chief or Craig Johnson if they want one of these beautiful shirts, you know, to get the word out, to let our citizens know that this is out there for everybody. You know, I'm sitting here thinking, I know Craig gave me a packet and I haven't done anything with it, but after listening to what Karen said, she's right. I'm fiddling over here, fiddling over there. I need to put one in my glove compartment. So I thank you for that. I thank you for all that you do. Craig, I know you're all over the place and your heart is huge. It's huge. So thank you, thank you, thank you. If does anybody else have anything to say? If not, you're excused.
Thank you guys for letting me be here.
And I also know that you would go and talk to any groups that would be interested.
Most definitely.
I know he yearns for that. He needs something to do, so give him a call.
Taylor,
Okay.
want a picture?
They go. Oh,
Yeah, for the,
okay. Thanks again, Craig.
you could just put it on.
Next, we will get started with the presentation from the Governor's Commission. And Dr. Anderson, I will turn it over to you. I apologize for that. Mr. Johnson had somewhere to go. But it was good to hear that my 501 people, they like it. You know, so it was good to hear that.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for having us. As I am joining you today, and I believe we sent the PowerPoint over to your staff. So as they pull that up, I also want to, you've already acknowledged Commissioner Nave. He's going to get us started.
Just a second, Dr. Anderson, if you can
Answer
hear us,
questions
we're
you may
having a
have.
little bit of
I serve
difficulties.
as the co-chair of the Commission for Racial Equity and Justice. And the other co-chair is Dr. Shannon Portilla, who is not with us today. And then with that, I'm also the superintendent of Topeka Public Schools. At this time, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Nave. And you may want to need to take yourself off mute, Commissioner Nave.
Always helps.
There we go. Now, good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see everyone, and I'm glad you spent some time with us. I hope everyone has had a chance to have a copy of that or get the report from the governor's office and download it and have a chance to read it and absorb the information. There's a lot to offer there. And always know that that is a tool that has been created for anyone that they want to see what their recommendations were and soak up that information as well. So I'm going to start with a little history and the background about the commission. The governor signed an executive order 20-48 on June 21st, 2020, forming the Governor's Commission on Racial Equity and Justice. She asked the commission to study issues of racial equity and justice across systems in Kansas, focusing first on policing and law enforcement. The commission includes perspectives from the criminal justice system, education, healthcare, and advocacy organizations. Now, this is not a commission on criminal justice reform. It is focused on broad issues of racial equity in Kansas, which includes some elements of the criminal justice system, but is not tasked with the comprehensive study of that system. In 2021, the commission is focusing on studying racial equity within the economic systems, education, and healthcare. Racial equity in policing. The commission was created in the midst of a national conversation about race and policing, following the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and others. In addition to individual cases, studies have found that race has an impact on policing. Nationally, Black drivers are more likely to be stopped by police than white drivers, and are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement.
And so as Commissioner Nave has given that background, I see the PowerPoint isn't moving, and I don't know if it's helpful for me to be co-hosted before I go into the process and timeline. I know with this being on Facebook Live, it's real helpful for people to kind of see some of the points in addition to those that are listening in. And so if there's a challenge with getting those slides to move, then if you co-host with me, I can share it and then pull those up. And it looks like we're at process and timeline. So as we talk a little bit about the process and timeline, and thanks for whoever's behind the screen, making sure that these other pieces are able to move along. It is appreciated. And so as we talk about the process and timeline, as Commissioner Nave shared, as the commission was put together, we really had about 6 months to really do a deep dive and study. And so as we kind of go to this next slide, I'll share a little bit about what this work look like, and then from there he'll talk about the first set of recommendations, and then I'll share the remaining recommendations. So the commissioner's work entailed really having 11 meetings. We met every other week, which we are still doing now. In those 11 meetings, those were the meetings for the full commission, and they were held starting in July. In those full commission meetings, we heard from a number of experts on areas related to policing, law enforcement. Specifically, we heard from the National Governors Association. They gave a report on the previous federal and state law enforcement reform. They gave reports and recommendations. The Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center, that law enforcement training in Kansas, they talked about what that looks like. And we always ended really with asking in every one of our overall sessions, what are some things that you would really like to see moving forward, and what are some areas of opportunities that we have as a state. We talked about tribal issues in law enforcement, specifically tribal interactions with the criminal justice system and tribal jurisdiction. In that same 11 meetings that we had as a general session, we also listened to the Kansas Commission on Peace Officers Standards and Training, so CPOST. We had as a speaker Judge Arnold Berger on pretrial justice task force report. He really talked about pretrial and bail reform. The State Board of Indigent Defense Services and Federal Public Defender's Office reported out, and they really talked about public defense and the challenges and opportunities there in providing a adequate public defense. And then the Governor's Grants Office and the Attorney General also reported, and they really spent time with us talking about funding for law enforcement. So from that, we then held learning sessions. And so as we go to this very next slide, those meetings that we held every other week, we built the structure of having speakers that ensured that the full commission were informed. But then those 26 learning sessions within that time occurred as well. In addition to those learning sessions, we really heard from community members, stakeholders, really anybody that wanted to join could also join virtually, including those from law enforcement, healthcare, education, municipal government, and we heard from academic experts. These sessions included a community session in Wichita, Dodge City. We held one in Hutchinson, we held one in Topeka, and we held one in KCK. We held one with the State Board of Indigent Defense Services. We held a learning session with the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, the Kansas Sheriff's Association, and we had a learning session with the Kansas Peace Officers Association. We held a session with the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement, also called NOBLE, and we listened to the Kansas chapter. We held a learning session with the National Association of Women Law Enforcement Officer Executives, also known as NALI, and we listened to the Kansas chapter of that. We held a session for the Kansas Mental Health Co-Responder Program leaders. We held one with the American Civil Liberties Union of Kansas and the League of Kansas Municipalities. From those sessions, as we kind of go to the next slide, some individuals contacted us by email, phone, some of it was just through social media, and many individuals emailed myself and my co-chair. On this very last slide about process and timeline, just so you know how we were able to delve into the work at the depth that we were, since we came out with 60 recommendations. This process and timeline, again, really what began with that full commission hearing from experts and stakeholders. From that, we began building our recommendations for the governor. Once those recommendations were drafted, we then went back to many of the people that we received feedback from, and we got feedback from those stakeholders. So we went to several law enforcement agencies and listened to their feedback about the report. We made some adjustments to the report from that. We listened to other feedback from other individuals across the state and made adjustments, further adjustments. Then finally, that commission report was presented as a final report to the governor on December the 1st. I'm going to turn it back over to Commissioner Nave to share a little bit about our recommendations.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Anderson. And some of the recommendations that came forth in this report included over 60 recommendations for state agencies, the legislature, and local governments. And some of the recommendations primarily focused on issues of law enforcement training, officer certification and standards. We talked about the recommendations of recruitment, retention, and promotion, accountability, data collection, and public defense. The justice system, school resource officers, tribal jurisdictions, immigration and law enforcement, and behavioral health. And then we talked about law enforcement training, funding. Some examples of some local recommendations were a mandated review of records during the hiring process. Recommend law enforcement agencies be required to check in on officers' records with CPOS, which is the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, before making a hiring decision. Additionally, if and when a national database is created, law enforcement agencies should also be required to check the national database for information. We explored options around increasing officer pay, including salary enhancements tied to a degree attainment for law enforcement officers. And that will include increased officers' pay as a dual positive effect on law enforcement agencies. It helps engage more diverse and qualified applicants and improve the overall quality of officers and recruitment efforts throughout the state. Additionally, studies have shown that law enforcement officers with higher levels of education are less likely to commit use of force violations. 21 law enforcement agencies should reward officers for attaining higher education degrees with salary enhancements and promote a general furthering of education within the department. Another example of some local recommendations: encourage promotion, retention of underrepresented groups so the command structure represents the community being served all across Kansas. We encourage law enforcement agencies to not only hire, but promote and retain traditionally underrepresented groups within the agency. Efforts to retain and promote these groups in integral in ensuring the department at all levels of the command structure is reflective of the community, and it serves and creates practices to reduce bias in policing. Another example would be review and revise policies and training on the use of force. Review and revise policies and training on use of force to authorize only the minimum amount of force necessary to protect our citizens and officer safety. That is proportional to the incident. That brings an unlawful situation safely and effectively under control, and that preserves the Constitution and human rights of that individual.
I'll be going through the remaining recommendations, and those include, and again, we're keeping in mind we had 60, we're just highlighting some for you. We talked about SROs, and the SRO programs really should include elements that demonstrate the school district's commitment to an inclusive and welcoming environment for its students. And this was a pretty big conversation, actually, as we began to kind of close out. But really, in order to ensure that SRO programs are positive for students and creating an inclusive and productive educational environment, school districts really should create programs with elements including, but not limited to, having a strong relationship between officers and school personnel, a policy requiring community meetings and or receptions to introduce the SROs to families and assure families that SROs are present to keep the children safe and build positive relationships with students and the community. Clear agreements between school districts and the police departments that delineate the role of the SROs, which should not include performing school discipline. You know, we heard from SROs across the state, and they gave some great examples in Wichita and beyond. We shared some in Topeka Public Schools, in which really there were some excellent relationships being built that included social work types of things in terms of home visits and matters of that nature. And so really reinforcing that as opposed to utilizing SROs for discipline were key pieces that we had as takeaways. The other areas that we looked at was just policy on immigration. So we are recommending that there's an adoption of a clear policy and transparent policy on how, if at all, local law enforcement, counties, cities, and others will treat immigration enforcement efforts, including providing resources and assistance to ICE. Develop the policy in conversation with community members, including immigrant communities, and we're encouraging investing in education on this policy. We also have as a recommendation to support and finance the use of mobile crisis response models, including co-responder and virtual co-responder models to assist law enforcement in responding to behavioral health calls and stops. Mental health professionals who ride with and work alongside law enforcement officers can contribute to positive outcomes and promote treatment over incarceration for individuals experiencing mental health crisis. Kansas communities really should implement appropriate co-responder programs where possible, and we heard that from across the state. Commissioner Nave will share other recommendations that we have as well, and then we'll just wrap up and invite some questions from the council.
I want to give some examples of some legislative recommendations that we gathered from all the listening sessions of experts. And one of them was to increase diversity on Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training. Current requirements and statute define CPOS membership narrowly. They should be updated to allow more diversity, race, gender, and geographical and appointments to the commission. This may include adding qualified professionals in related fields outside of law enforcement and expanding law enforcement members to include deputy chiefs and undersheriffs. Another example, amend statutes that require citizenships for law enforcement officers, aligning requirements with U.S. military standards for service. Kansas law KSA 74-5605B1 prohibits law enforcement agencies from hiring non-citizens with legal status as law enforcement officers. This policy prevents agencies from taking advantage of legal permanent residents, green card holders, DACA recipients, and other potential community members who may make high quality and committed law enforcement officers. Kansas should align with those requirements to serve in the military. Another example of state and agency recommendations, create a law enforcement supervisors training program. Kellogg should create a supervisors training program or academy. All law enforcement officers promoted to a supervisory position should be required to attend the college within 6 months of promotion. The Supervisors Academy should require 40 hours of continued education yearly, which may take the place of the standard ongoing training requirements and should be specific to leadership levels. The requirement and should be specific. The supervisors training should focus on frontline supervisors, mid-level supervisors, and include topics of public administration, law and society, management, leadership, and ethics.
So with those recommendations and kind of concluding with that KLETC component, we are really not only looking at the opportunity gaps that we can close and how we can transform and continue to improve, but really how we grow individuals and develop individuals that could continue to rise in the supervisory ranks and give them really a differentiated training. And so the full commission report, which encompasses not only training, but a variety of other areas, is listed on the website that is posted, governor.kansas.gov. And that racial equity and justice report, along with many of the recordings of meetings and learning sessions held by the commission and documents used to develop recommendations, are posted there. I would encourage anyone to kind of look through those and see those 60 recommendations. Now, as we conclude and answer questions, do know that the commission is still in place. We still meet every other week, but now we've really taken that particular report and we've divided ourselves into three areas that really focus on the social determinants of health. So we're currently still meeting, and this meeting that we currently are having now and the commission report that will come out this year is really focused on three areas: education, health and healthcare is a general area, and economics. All of those things really overlap the main report. You know, so when we're talking about mental health and we're talking about the school to prison pipeline, or as we talk about economic prosperity and things that contribute to individuals becoming incarcerated, all of those really overlap this first report. So those areas of economics, healthcare, education will have an ongoing in-depth study. The commission has divided into three areas. I chair the education, and there are other chairpersons that address those other two. We anticipate those recommendations that we come out with this year will automatically feed right on into that very first report. At this time, I'll stop, and we both are available to address questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. And Taylor, do we have a copy of that for the council?
Liz has a copy.
Liz has a copy. Okay, I'll make sure that we get that. That was a very good slideshow. Very good presentation. Thank you, and John. Does anybody want to start? Is there any questions here?
Go ahead.
Karen?
I just wondered, I have a specific question about the immigration page that you had about working with ICE, and then I have a broader question. But what was the intent of the slide section that you quoted about working with ICE in schools? I thought that students didn't have to be citizens to go to school.
When Commissioner Nate certainly can piggyback this comment if he would like to, but I will tell you, we heard a lot of fear from the immigration community, actually. Everything from unmarked vehicles to a perception, I guess, about issues that may come about impacting undocumented individuals. And so, you know, really, as we really listen to one of our commission members who's from Dodge City, actually, Commissioner De La Rosa, and others that are on the commission, there was a desire to have a very clear statement about where boundaries lie as it relates to that. You know, some of the pieces within the report, some individuals have shared might be a bit of reinforcement of other reports or other things that we know should be occurring in a certain way. However, hearing from the community, we saw our role as part of their voice. So as part of that voice within the community, there was definitely a desire to make sure that particular recommendation was clear so that the boundaries within departments were identified within the report and reinforced as a statement.
If I may, Chair, what the confusion for me was that my thought along the lines of what you just described was that the schools would be a safe haven and that ICE would not be welcome in the school, and it sounded like the recommendation was to invite them in, and so.
The idea here was it was really to adopt a clear policy on immigration enforcement efforts, and we really addressed that local law enforcement, how they treat immigration enforcement efforts, which would include you know, the resources that are provided and assistance. There is, in some cases, it was shared that there is some level of collaboration. This is outside of schools. This is law enforcement in general. This is not related necessarily specifically within schools. This really came up from community agencies and individuals within communities who felt as though there was no policy. There was no clear delineation about boundaries at all in terms of an overall policy. So our recommendation as just a local effort, and this may not be in every community, is that there is a policy that's in conversation with community members. Immigration communities felt in some cases, if there was a policy, they weren't included in the conversation. So there were two pieces here. One, ensure there's a clear policy, so there's not confusion about ICE, and so there's clarity of safe havens in schools as an example, but more in terms of law enforcement when undocumented individuals are addressed, that there's a clear policy about what that looks like, and that policy, where there aren't policies, when they're created, that immigrant communities are no longer left out. And then the piece about the investing in education on that policy, there's a feeling as though education and schools aren't really included in some of the policies that are currently made. So that's really the intent behind that. And again, this is not every community, but we felt as though the local recommendations that local communities should adopt are greater transparency and clarity in language. And lack of or reduction in exclusion from some of our immigrant communities. Commissioner Nave, did you want to add to that at all for Councilman Hiller?
Yes, and it gave a clear, from what we heard from the learning sessions, of what those young men and women out in Western Kansas and Southeast Kansas experienced. and that even when those families continue to live in Kansas and have all the legal documentations that they need, that they would, want to get into law enforcement. So they had that opportunity. There's the transparency there, that there's a clear understanding and legislation for local and at state level. So there was a lot of dialogue, a lot of conversation.
Thank you.
I think that's good to hear. It's good to see you, John.
Good to see you.
Councilman Padilla?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I may, John or Dr. Anderson, either of you, could you speak to discussions that would address current conditions and recommendations in the juvenile justice system, the interaction of law enforcement in the juvenile justice system, the sources available to communities. I think we all agree that as soon as possible, positive interactions between the youth and law enforcement is important. And I would love to hear what some of those conversations included about ideas, recommendations in that area.
We are, and I'll start and then turn it over to Commissioner Nave. We're so fortunate that we have one of the chiefs from Wichita, on our commission, and as that commissioner has been in that space, we were able to really hear from communities specifically about examples of things that work well. The collaboration and partnership, which is listed in some of our recommendations between schools and policing, so that you can see a greater mentorship and partnership. Those were things that were shared with us that we included in our report. I will tell you that one of the issues that also was discussed heavily were school resource officers and how they're used and how they shouldn't be used. They shouldn't be used as disciplinarians, and there was a perception by some that having police in schools leads to youth being incarcerated. What we learned, however, within our time together was that that's not actually what the data shows. It does show that when school resource officers are used well, often, that's the opportunity for them to intervene in schools, build relationships, and avoid incarceration. The other pieces that we learned was that the diversity and recruitment for individuals that look like the communities they serve built better trust, and we heard examples of that. And so in our report, we have several areas of encouraging recruitment for diverse individuals that look more like the community that young people are in, and ways to be able to do that. So that's included in the report as well. And I would say lastly, an item that for me that I think rang very clear were opportunities, and I think the one we just talked about is an example of that. Opportunities to build greater relationships. And so training came up, I think, almost in every learning session, including from the officers. This piece of training as it relates to how to engage with young people and the history of policing, as well as ensuring that the way we engage communities and changes in many of our communities. And so that level of training, there is training currently available, but many of the officers shared that it's the same every year. It's not very differentiated. So if you've been around for 20 years, you may not have had the level of diversity training and anti-bias training that that you would need to really be effective in working within some of our communities. Commissioner Nave, would you like to add to that in terms of ways to further support youth and to build those relationships?
Yeah, and one particular learning session that we learned from the Wichita, I think there were SRO officers that and court service officers that worked in the schools, closely with the schools, and built those relationships with those students, at-risk students. And they did, and they found that it was actually more helpful and resourceful to have those officers there interacting with those young men and developing a good communication and relationship. And those officers and those students saw that individuals that look like them. So with the training and the diversity and inclusion, it further bettered the relationship and built trust within the law enforcement community, with those officers and with those students, those at-risk students. So it was some really good information that we gathered from Wichita, Topeka. I know we had an outstanding session here with the law enforcement community, our SROs, officers, but more importantly, we got to continue to improve and engage and get those officers and recruitment of good officers that that look like us, you know, from all across the community.
Yeah, just to add an example of that. So in Topeka, and I saw Chief Cochran on the screen, in Topeka, one of the things that we talked about, even as an example, you know, in high school right now at TCALC in Topeka Public Schools, we actually have officers teaching class. It was something that Chief Cochran identified as a model from outside of Topeka. And that actually has allowed our officers, one, to be seen as educators and mentors, and but it's also allowed us to identify young people who want to go in the law enforcement pathway. It's a pathway right from high school. You can get training now. You can have some opportunities and exposure right now, and it allows for really a school to police officer pipeline right there in a recruitment. We heard about some of those programs that are not quite the same, but some similar kinds of programs in which we're training young people now in preparation for what the future looks like. And the officers are really involved in some of those high schools. Places where that was occurring, that came up in learning sessions. And we encouraged it throughout the report for that to be a continued area of focus and opportunity to explore.
Madam Chair, if I may. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. You beat me to the punch. I was going to bring up TCALC, but I wanted to ask a couple things about TCALC and the officers who are there. And maybe Chief Wheelis can also chime in here. The officers who participate in that program, do they get specific training separate from what you would call law enforcement training to address the best ways to communicate with the youth, the best ways to create a lesson plan? Do they get, I don't want to say teacher training, but in a way, that's what I'm looking at, because that's the role that they're filling. And so I just want to know if there's that additional training emphasis given to the officers who have stepped forward to do that. And then beyond that, the second part of that is the SROs generally that are assigned within the school system. Do they also have that opportunity to get specific training that helps them in their role that they play in the schools?
And so I'll address that, but then I'll also turn it over to Chief Cochran if he wants to add something that maybe I've left out. First of all, yes, they do receive additional training. And so both TCALC as well as the SROs in schools, and that has really allowed us to include them as a teacher. And so when we're giving diversity training, when we're giving restorative justice training, when we're talking about how do you de-escalate a student, they're included as a staff member in that training. We have home visits throughout Topeka Public Schools. It's required if a student is absent 2 days without parent contact. I mean, there's no reason to wait 5 or 10 days for a child to be truant. But the officer goes with these teachers or social workers or whomever, and so they receive training on what should that look like. And often they are really individuals who have truly helped us build some relationships in communities. in ways that perhaps we may not have been able to in that same way. But at TCALC specifically, the officers are included in the staff meetings. They're observed just like you would observe a teacher. They're given feedback. So that level of partnership is absolutely beautiful. And actually, it's our strongest pathway. I mean, you would think with some of what you hear about police officers and youth in schools that they wouldn't want to take that class, but actually that's one of our most popular classes. It's always full. There's always a waiting list, and the relationships are just fantastic. Chief Cochran, did you want to add to that at all in terms of the training from the department that I might not have really tapped into that coordinates with the school system? Not hearing him chime in on that. Does that kind of answer?
Dr. Anderson, I'm going to intervene here. We have a new chief now, so I'll ask our new chief if he would like to speak on that, okay?
And I know that Chief Cochran retired.
Yeah.
Although it says Chief Cochran on here.
And you know, we're going to have to do
apologies. Yes.
No, we're going to have to do something about his name because everybody still sees him as, you know, it says Chief Cochran, and we still see that there. And so
even I'm used to saying that from just 2 months ago. So my sincere apologies extended.
No problem.
But if there's anything that I've left out.
No problem. I'm going to ask Chief Wheelis if he would like to intervene there, interject.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. No harm, no foul, as far as that goes. But no, I thought Dr. Anderson covered it. I don't really have a lot to add in regards to that. I mean, she covered it. The TCALC officers are trained and certified as teachers. And that's what I said.
But what about the SROs who are not TCALC?
There are certification programs for the SROs that are specific to those training things. And there are some of the SROs that we have who've been through that training, and we're certainly interested in making that be a comprehensive program across the board. We're not there yet,
Yeah.
but.
Thank you, Chief. And I think that's important to point out, that we're not just putting an officer there and not giving them the tools to interact with the students, because that wouldn't be as successful as we are now. I just want people to understand that we hear that all the time. I'm sure my colleagues will agree that we hear about training, but I don't know that enough information is put out there about what training is actually taking place and to what degree that the effort is being made. Always room for new ideas and suggestions, but I think we need to let people know the good job that 501 and the police department are doing as a collaboration in doing that, meeting that need.
I agree.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I will share that some of what Topeka is doing actually was used as an example of a model, which includes, again, some of the school training. There aren't many places that actually employ officers as teachers, and not many police departments that will give up an officer to actually teach in the classroom in the way that we have as a career pipeline. And the other example throughout the commission that was also an example, and we may be the only one in the state, Topeka may be, addressing driver's license. You know, when individuals can't get a driver's license, perhaps because they're undocumented, but having a way to have an ID. I think Topeka was also a model for what that could look like. So there are many great things that I think we can build on. Now, we will adjust our training, but not just for officers, but for our teaching pool. And really, as a result, even of this experience, we're increasing our own training as it relates to restorative justice and other models in which to work with young people that are not as punitive. We have some of that in place. But again, as we expand it for our teachers, then also our SROs would automatically be involved. And I think that's something that we're saying across the state. Whatever you're doing for your teachers, you should also be including your SROs as opposed to keeping that siloed and separate.
Was that Alan?
That's fine.
That's great to hear, Dr. Anderson, that you do include them, because they are a big, crucial part of what goes on. And I've seen it for myself work in the middle school. So I have a couple of questions on that SRO. If I can read my notes here, let's see. So, and I have to remember that this report is statewide. It's not just Topeka. So when I read it, I had to say, okay, Sylvia, it's statewide, not just, local. So on the SROs, you do support them in the schools. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That was quite a hotly discussed topic, and perhaps hot might be a little bit too strong of a word, but that was quite a discussion. They have my full support in being in school and being used as a partner in education. And we actually heard from students in Topeka Public Schools. This is outside of the commission. We have an equity council, so we held in Topeka Public Schools a student session, and these were students who are, many of which were students of color, as well as students who are not students of color. So our Latino population, as well as our African American population, all of those students shared, and this was without an officer on the screen, just talking with us. All of those students shared experiences that were positive, everything from athletics and basketball, programs in the community, summer camps in the community, encouragement from their officer. Some of them shared their officer was their go-to person at the school. So in Topeka Public Schools, from the student perspective, we got some good feedback. We also heard some opportunities as well from our students, which included their perception of, depending on what community you were in, the experience varied. So we had a student that moved from different communities, and so the perception was different based on where they lived. But that was also a community perception issue. So that for us, we have found our SROs invaluable, and we continue to reinforce using them in ways that in which they can support students and have relationships, not as disciplinarians.
And I think that's important to hear, because I've heard, some talk about taking the SROs out of the schools, and I agree. I think they're very important. And I noticed that, and the only reason why I know this, I work for DCF, and I noticed that you stole a lot of our social workers. They went over to the schools to work, And so in talking to them, they have talked about how they feel safe with those officers there when they have to talk to those kids and they have to go check on those kids. Would that be the same for the rest of the staff as well?
I would say that if you were to ask the majority of staff and all of our principals, because we surveyed our principals as this became a topic, school resource officers was a topic over the last year. And so we surveyed our administrative staff and asked for them to connect with their staff. Overwhelmingly, all of them shared positive remarks about the SROs and the utilization as home visits. We really, the role of the SRO, school resource officer, was really to be a resource, kind of like a social worker, a partner, an individual to come alongside and really have that community policing model. And that's how we use it for our school community. We are in error and schools are in error if they use an SRO to try to discipline a student. That's not why they're there. So that takes ongoing training for everybody. And so again, that is a statewide report. So we gave some very general recommendations about training. And everyone doesn't have the access to training that Topeka Public Schools might have. Every school district, the smaller you are, the less resources you have. But I would say across the school, you will hear from teachers who also do home visits, from principals, that SROs really are a tremendous asset and tool that we rely greatly on in many ways from a social emotional health perspective alone. And a lot of people don't realize that.
Yes, I totally agree with that. But I just wanted to make sure that the committee agreed with that they thought that they were important to be in the schools. Did they talk about any of their uniforms or anything like that? Because I've also heard people say, that's threatening to the kids. I've talked to some of the kids and they're like, oh, it doesn't even bother them. I mean, I think them being there and keeping them safe is the number one priority for them.
We invited actually some national experts, and I've done quite a bit of talking, so I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Nave to share his thoughts. But we did invite a national expert as this topic continued to be discussed, because again, there is a perception nationally that police officers in schools lead to higher incarceration rates. But actually, the national data shows the opposite, that high incarceration rates often may happen when you actually don't have intervention in schools. And an intervention can be everything from a social worker, the school resource officers. We also know that if used well, a school resource officer can interrupt an individual who might otherwise have been incarcerated by connecting with the family and getting the family connected with the principal. And so we brought in a national expert on school resource officers who actually in and out of the country addresses this topic, and he presented. We had the authors of High Performing High Poverty Schools present, and then we had an administrator from one of the nationally known schools, I believe it was Mississippi or someplace. So experts outside of Topeka talking about the importance of school resource officers and how they can really help support the culture if used well. And that's the critical piece, if used properly. So one thing that did come up was, what they wear. In Topeka Public Schools, again, our students haven't shared that as an issue, nor have our staff, nor have our families. Some have a perception that, wearing street clothes makes you more of a partner in some fashion. I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Nave about his thoughts about attire and what came up, and anything else about school resource officers that he would like to share.
In all of our information that we gathered and some other areas of other cities here in Kansas or across the country, the dress of an officer can lower or heighten an individual's level of if they're going through something. And so if they see you in a certain, not in fatigues or military style uniforms, in some of these other areas in other cities, that was a big concern. But again, like Dr. Anderson stated, that wasn't an issue here in Topeka that we have heard. And I don't know, some of the recommendations down in Wichita, they may be a little different. Wyandotte County and Kansas City may be a little different, but it depends on the environment that we're in, what city, and what issues are affecting those school districts in various fashions. So I think that our SRO officers are outstanding here and much needed, and I encourage that we continue to do that.
And I'll share, this is why I tell people, just because you look like me doesn't mean you're for me. So you can dress like I dress, but doesn't necessarily mean that you are, prepared to meet me where I am. It is very situational. If you go to French middle school and they're having an event and they have their school shirts on, you might actually see the officer wearing something a little bit more relaxed. Or at one of our summer academies that the police department promotes, you may see attire that looks a little different than what they would normally wear. So I also think it's situational as well as community based.
And I totally agree with that. I'll put a plug in for our SROs, Dr. Anderson. They wanted some extra money so they could do some wood crafting things with the boys, just the boys in the middle schools. Yes, just the boys. They wanted to grab the boys, and so they were looking for extra monies. I'll just throw that out there too. You can make a note of that.
All right, so perhaps Chief there might round about with me or Larry Robbins, Larry Robbins that's my purse strings, and then connect with the deputy on what does that look like. But you do hit on a good point, in terms of our young men and our school to prison pipeline piece in terms of graduation, reading, all of that. Kids that have that pipeline to not graduate and to be incarcerated, young men really are people to target in terms of changing that perception of themselves and outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, Chief, you can talk to Mr. Robbins, and I'll tell him that that Councilwoman said to do that.
You know what I like about you, Dr. Anderson? You use everybody. Everybody's got a role here. It's not just all on your plate. That's what I like. Okay, is there any more questions for Dr. Anderson or Commissioner Nave? Yes, Karen.
Well, I was just going to ask in general, we've talked about some, but if some specific things out of that state report that you're thinking we should talk about further in terms of bringing them here for change?
Well, again, there's 60 recommendations there,
Right.
and there's certainly some. I would welcome sitting down with the chief, since there was a change in chiefs right when we were finishing this report. And again, while this is statewide, I really haven't had the opportunity. I know with Chief Cochran, we met, multiple times throughout the year. I think this is a really good opportunity to just sit down and have conversation. The report being a framework for the entire state, some things we already do quite well, but some things are just continued enhancements. One of those, the training piece, is a continued enhancement that we're doing for our teachers. But really looking at where does that cross over between the department just in general and things that we give that perhaps could benefit. You don't even have to be a school officer, but could benefit from some of that. There's some other items related to mental health in particular, and that I would love to continue to talk about. It's really about how do we continue to get better from where we are, and how do we build trust in the community in ways that are transparent and that they feel really good about. The last item was data. There is, and I really am no expert on this, on what we do or don't provide in Topeka, and I certainly recognize that sitting and listening to all of these officers across the state who really shared a lot that led to that recommendation. There is data available in different ways, but the amount as it relates to demographics, I really wasn't as informed of what we are able to provide, so that, again, parents feel that there's a transparency, and students, and that there's trust as it relates to that, based on racial breakdown as it relates to that. So I would just encourage we keep doing what we're doing as it relates to the partnership for SROs, for creating the pipeline. But I would also encourage that the continued collaboration occurs as we have a new chief, and perhaps some regular opportunities, which kind of is mentioned in the report, to really meet with the school system in a more systematic way. Chief Cochran and I, we just kind of connected, and he would pop over and just call, and that worked out really well for us to have those meetings. He came to some of the schools and talked with students with me and my student groups. But I would encourage, maybe there's a systemic every month or every quarter connection that might be helpful to just get in front of things. Councilwoman Hiller, are those things that you feel as though are kind of in alignment with what you're in support of? Those are just some of the thoughts moving forward.
Well, I appreciate the feedback. It's a little overwhelming to have the statewide report and 60 recommendations. As I read through it, we were given copies of the report, I think, a couple of months ago. And so as I flipped through it again today, I had circled in many places. Sometimes it was just a comment, a discussion, and thinking, oh, maybe we should talk about that more here in Topeka. It just piqued my interest. And then, of course, what you all thought from all that statewide perspective, and then advising us. We're charged with, without a deadline yet, but trying to bring all this input into some specific recommendations to either leave things the same or make change here in terms of police and community relations. And so, just the school policing relations are a whole huge entity in and of themselves. So I was just looking to see if there were some specific things that had come out of that you thought we should consider here, whether it's school related or not.
Well, and one of the items that, I would, again, like to propose as an next step. And, Councilwoman Hiller, to your very point of the statewide report, and our Councilwoman earlier shared this as well, that ICE where you talked about, hey, aren't schools a safe haven? Topeka Public Schools actually did write our own policy, and we put it out there for parents. You are safe in schools.
Good.
So there's really no question in Topeka. And, our statement said, have a policy if at all, so again, this goes statewide, depending on what they do or don't have in place. So for us, I would encourage as a next step that, now that the report is published, I'm more than happy, and I think in a small environment, just perhaps with myself and the chief, and if someone else wants to sit in on that, to really kind of go through that report and to talk about what do we currently have in place and how do we continue to have a very transparent and clear relationship moving forward that people know about. So someone mentioned earlier, people don't know about our training. Well, we could easily post that on our own website. We could easily have something joint that talks about the partnership. We don't have that right now. I mean, I think there are ways that we can easily kind of delineate, here's what SRO officers do in Topeka. So I think that's an opportunity for myself and the new chief, and that might help break down perceptions that are just wrong about what does or doesn't happen. I think that's a good next step for us, just to have a small meeting with maybe 3 people or so to just talk about what does the next school year look like, and then to really talk about what are the opportunity gaps that we had prior to COVID, because this past year has just been really odd, but on the heels of the social unrest and the racial unrest within the community, what are opportunity gaps that we can close? So I think that would give you some very specific recommendations that I think we to enhance or to address moving forward. And I would encourage that we do that within the next 30 days or so before this year closes. And I certainly am happy to create time. I would invite Commissioner Nave, since he's so active in the community and a commissioner within the CREJ, to just sit with me to kind of go through this report, and together from his perspective as a community member, from mine as a superintendent, and just that's one step we can do, and to say which one of these things that really we need to continue to focus on in Topeka. And when we say training, that's pretty broad. What are the things that we just need to do better or we need to build on right here in Topeka? I would encourage that as a next step. And again, I say the 30-day because soon the school year will be over, and I'd love for you to have some immediate feedback as a next step.
Thank you so much. I hope that when you have that conversation, you could broaden it even a little bit in terms of police community relations, deciding where, for youth overall and crime prevention, there's more than just in the schools, and maybe some feedback to us even before we get all done, but where is the right place for police to be involved in sports activities, in the schools, outside the schools, what's the best way for us to model, not just, like I say, not just in the schools, but community at large, to, from your perspective, working with the young people on the end of it, it's broader than that, and we're all trying to reach out to figure what the balance is, what the best place is to have officers, and when we do, is it full-time and they have a kind of a double or triple major and hat on, or is it in partnership with others and making significant appearances and engagement, but not being there all the time, for instance, just to feel our way through ways that
definitely we'll do. I would also invite that I do have a student group, a superintendent student advisory of high school students, and I have my former high school students that are now college students that live right here in Topeka. That would also be more than happy to join just, as a separate just youth conversation with the chief, and that could be another next step. We had planned to do something similar with Chief Cochran, and then the pandemic happened and everything else occurred, and so that did not take place. To my knowledge, there really hasn't been a very focused equity council conversation about policing in the community broadly with just our young people. And I think that would be a great opportunity to just meet young people and establish that. Again, I have an established group already. We have these conversations, and I would invite the chief to also participate in that. So those are two separate conversations, again, certainly happening within the next 30 days that we could make available. Commissioner Nave, would you agree to that as well if you were to join that on the community end?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
Good. Chief Wheelis would like to ask you something?
Well, first of all, Dr. Anderson, I appreciate the invitation. It could be more timely. I literally have an email in my draft box that was sent to you that's going to have some opening dates because I've been looking forward to the conversation. But I also want to plug Commissioner Nave because I was looking for a place to jump in with this, but to give him the props, when this report first came out, he met with us. Chief Cochran and I, and went through the recommendations, and we were very happy with the number of things that we already had in place. But I wanted to give Commissioner Nave that credit because, as Dr. Anderson pointed out, he's very involved in a lot of communities, but the Topeka one in general, and he had that conversation with us very shortly after the report came out. So I've had the opportunity to talk to him and go through some of these things that we have in place that were the recommendations. So I applaud the body that's represented here to want to have that further conversation, and Dr. Anderson for her leadership. But I didn't want the meeting to end without giving Commissioner Nave the credit for the work that he's actually done behind the scenes that maybe very few people know that he's done. But he's always been a resource for Bill Cochran and for myself at this point too. But we went through this report with him, and I appreciated his insight.
That's awesome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
That's great to hear that you're still busy, John. That's great to hear.
Keep him off the streets.
So I heard you say that you guys are still meeting, the group is still meeting, correct? Will there be?
That is correct.
Will there be another report, or will they have amendments to this report, or do you know?
There'll be a second report. Chief Ramsey from Wichita, he's one of our commissioners as well. And, and that went into some of the issues that we talked about with funding police departments and funding these crisis mobile units and things like that. But one of the things that came out of that as well was, mental health issues that, our police departments are faced with across the state, and how do we support that? So that just automatically, when we looked at some of the issues that we need to tackle, the governor was very clear that this is not about policing. This is about equity and justice and equity gaps across the state. So we started with, because of some of the issues, talking about policing, but she made it very clear from the very beginning to myself and my co-chair that this would be ongoing, and we determined how this might continue to move forward. It was clear to us as a commission that those three big areas, economics, education, healthcare, all of those help determine your prosperity and future ultimately. And so those are the three areas we're going to be talking about into next year and perhaps in years to come. These are just systemic things across Kansas that we feel like are opportunities for us to address. Expansion of early childhood, all kinds of things. These are things that, not having those, that's how you have the school to prison pipeline. And so it's not, a reactive measure, but what can we do proactively, to really transform our communities and to support continued growth in our police departments in ways that we all feel like are needed.
And I think you already do this, or somebody does this, Dr. Anderson, but if you would continue to invite us to your Zoom meetings that you have. I've listened in on, I think, a couple of them, but I don't know about the rest of the council. I think we get them via email, but just to make sure with whoever's sending those invites out to invite us, that would be great.
We'll go back, and Commissioner Nave, I guess we'll have to remember to share that with Ms. Davis. The next meeting is, the full meeting is next Thursday, because now every 2 weeks, the subcommittees, education, healthcare, economics, they meet. So the full commission only meets, every 6 weeks or so, but we will make sure that you, now that you're still on that list, to get that Zoom or a Facebook Live link. And again, it is Thursday at 3 o'clock. Next Thursday is the next meeting, but we'll make sure you receive that. Our next report will be we are to give a mid report in June to the governor, and the final report, the draft, will be done in June. But the final public report will be done again in December. And this full year, we again will focus on the 3 areas that I've mentioned. And Commissioner Nave mentioned, Chief, that he did meet with you all previously and went through that. And so we're both looking forward to just talking about education and young people and how do we continue to get better and expand what we're doing, build onto the good stuff, and perhaps create new opportunities.
Does
Absolutely.
anybody else have anything else for them? If not, I'd just like to say thank you. Thank you for your time. Dr. Anderson, I personally want to say thank you for all that you do. I don't know how you do it. You know, I understand why you wear the tennis shoes because you're everywhere. You're everywhere. I had to go to a couple schools and I've seen you in and out. And that means so much to your staff. You know, I've seen you at funerals. I've seen you come into houses to welcome kids. And all that plays a big, important role. And I think you're just a great role model. And I just want to personally thank you for all that you do for our young people in Topeka.
Thank you so much. And as we close, I also want to echo what you just said right back to you. One, the City Council has really been, I think, a group of individuals that you are really committed to service above self, and you show it in so many ways. Everything from civic engagement to the conversation today, inviting us today to have a conversation about how do we continue to transform. I appreciate that, and I don't have the opportunity to tell you all that individually frequently beyond a forum like this. So personally, thank you for your service. And Chief, thank you for your service in your department. I just have to commend and applaud you for what you all have done in the past, what you're doing presently, and what I anticipate we have ahead in the future. Sir, thank you for your service and applaud you and the department.
Thank you.
And there old Chief Cochran is. I shouldn't have said old Chief Cochran, but there you are, sir. So we just love you, and we really do. And we look forward to a continued great partnership moving forward.
Okay, we will invite you back. Believe that. Thanks
Thank you.
again.
Bye-bye.
Okay, the next presentation, let's see how much time we have here, is discussion on the customer service protocols.
Yeah, I
Thank you.
sent Liz a short presentation this week, if we could put that up there.
Just plain Bill. that's what we call it.
I don't think he wants old Bill up there, does he?
No, just plain Bill.
We could take a vote on that. Old Bill, old Bill Cochran.
Sylvia. Councilwoman. Councilwoman.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I emailed that.
Yes, she was doing.
I knew she'd have it on the top of her fingertips.
She did. If not, we'll just,
I can push through it without it if she.
yeah.
Maybe you're right.
Did Liz answer you?
If not, you can,
I can just push through it.
we could send you, we could send you the link.
We've got a print.
I can hold up.
Well, I was thinking for the people at home.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't on the email?
Do you have anywhere,
Yeah, I can just push through it.
you got anywhere where you can email it from?
No,
Okay.
I'd have to go back and pull it up.
You'd have to run out of the room?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
It's coming. Put my glasses on, then they fog, then I take them off, and I can't see, then there's no win in this
There's
game.
no way.
Did you get your shot, Karen? Did you get your shot?
Not my second one yet.
Uh-oh.
Had somebody who wanted me to meet with him the next morning. I said, well, as long as I survive it, otherwise you.
I need to check on Spencer. He's like, if I fall out, it's because I had the shot.
we go.
All right.
There we go.
Yep.
Okay, take it away.
All right. So I noticed some of the questions pertaining to customer service had to do with the front desk and front desk procedures, the reporting that occurs there, as well as the online reporting, and then just some general customer service questions. So these slides will kind of cover some of those procedures, hopefully provide some clarification, and then if obviously questions, we can answer that. So if you want to move to that second slide. And I provided the group the two policies that were mentioned in the upcoming slides. So the front desk procedures, we have personnel have direct contact with the public, must represent the department in an efficient, professional manner. We ensure uniformity, accountability, and service to the public. If you go to the next slide, we're talking about the front desk, the report desk. When you walk in the front doors of the law enforcement center, the picture in the upper right there, that's what we're talking about. That is manned or operated 24/7, 365 days a year with a officer. The front lobby's open. So they offer resources, and we'll get to what can be reported there, some of the things that we try not to report there because it's better to have an actual field response to get a more thorough investigation out of. But officers working at the front desks will assist the needs of the public in a courteous and timely fashion. This is directly out of policy. Just a few of the highlights. Officers working the front desk shall complete reports as needed, following the same guidelines as in working in patrol territory. So in other words, when a citizen walks into the front lobby to make a,
I know, you're fine.
I try to look at everybody.
I tried to go back, he went forward.
I got you, I'm out of the way.
I'm about to go across the room.
When a citizen walks into the lobby of the law enforcement center, I think it's important for them to know that the report that they're making there is no different in quality or context than an officer responding to their house or their business, taking that report. So the same detail can be gathered there. Obviously, some reports are much more in-depth or detailed, and there may be some things that a citizen just doesn't want to stand out in a public setting in the lobby to report or to have their business aired in that manner. So that's why, sometimes a field response is better, even if it is something that can be taken at the front desk. So front desk officers are busy. Citizens are required to wait for an extended period of time. A patrol officer should be called off the street to assist if available. And that just speaks to the customer service piece there. It can get very busy out there, especially during times of inclement weather where we have a walk-in accident reporting. We definitely experienced, I think we handled that very well during the pandemic. We increased the number of reports that were taken either over the phone or at the front desk to try to reduce some of that face-to-face contact during the pandemic as well. But at any time when, a citizen's out here trying to have a contact with one of their police officers and trying to make a report, we certainly don't want them waiting longer than they have to. So the front desk officer always has the ability to reach out and have a patrolman come in off the street and kind of augment the manpower at the front desk, if you will, and kind of speed that process up. Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair. And to that point, I remember that's kind of been a practice forever today, I think, since we had the front desk out there, that we could call in a field officer to supplement. It's also been my experience that a lot of times the field officers aren't available because they're busy in the field, and that might not be an immediate relief. I've always wondered about the idea of having, I know we have our VIPs, volunteer certain periods of time in the day or something, so that they're pretty familiar with the department and report taking and so forth. I know they're not sworn law enforcement, but could there be some consideration in training those who might not want to, some VIPs might rather do office assistance rather than in the field, that they would be available, so that way we still keep that uniformed officer out in the field, but we still address taking the report from the citizen. It's just a thought. I don't know if it's practical or not. It's just, I know those VIPs are very eager to help and work hard. A good old school friend of mine, Phil Ortega, he's been in that operation forever. Does a great job. It's just a thought.
We do utilize our volunteers and our VIPs at the front desk for a lot of services. If nothing else, you know, they're able to maybe field or assist citizens in directing them to, you know, the various windows at the Records Bureau, or answer questions, or tell them what resources may or may not be available, while then that sworn officer at the desk then frees them up to actually handle the police report that is needed by the next citizen in line. You know, as far as training a civilian to take a police report, is it doable? Yes, but then the Kansas Standard Offense Report has to be submitted by a sworn officer. So there would be obstacles greater than just a Topeka answer for changing that process.
Yeah.
But they are invaluable for the other services that they do provide on a regular basis at the front desk, in alleviating some of the things that the desk officer would have to do,
Yeah.
and speeding up the customer service.
Yeah, I understand the qualifications that one might have to, that one does have to have in order to take an official police report. But somebody who comes in and says, I don't know, I just want to make a complaint about such and such, about my neighbor, or about the condition at a residence, you know, one of those kinds of things that really don't require a uniformed police officer at that level. Just a thought, if those things come up that way. I'm always thinking that, you know, the best place for a police officer is out on the street, and the more we keep them out there, the better. Thank you.
Captain, I think one of the things, like you just said, if there, well, let me start here. Is there always two people at the front desk?
No.
Okay, but we at least have one.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because I've heard some complaints of when people come in, they're like, he was busy, or da-da-da-da-da, you know, he was on the phone. And so I'm glad that Councilman Padilla asked that, because I didn't know if one of our VIPs could be there to answer the phone or help direct traffic, to do things to help that person. Because, you know, sometimes when people come in, they think, like, he was so busy, I just turned around and walked away. And I'm like, well, I mean, he has to answer the phone. How many people were there? You know, and then they can't really hear behind there, but then they assume that they're talking, whether it's, I don't know if they're talking on the phone, I don't know. So that was just a question to me, to help somebody kind of channel that traffic, if we have any traffic, you know, like that.
Yeah, and that is a prime example of what our volunteers and our VIPs do when they are stationed at the front desk.
So we do station them at the front desk?
Yes, they
Okay.
fairly regularly, actually, so,
I don't
yeah.
know.
They spend a fair amount of time out there.
They just get into the situation that he was talking about to Deputy Mayor Padilla. If they get into a situation where a report is required, that's a level where we have to have a police officer do it. But the VIPs are invaluable. The other thing is too, is we're just starting to get to the place where we can have the VIPs come back into the LEC and do those
Okay,
kind of things
that's
as
true.
well too. So
Okay.
I think these are all good ideas, and we can never spend enough time talking about all the great work that the VIPs do for us here at the LEC.
You know, and you know, convenience and customer service is the name of the game here, and if a citizen comes into the law enforcement center and for whatever reason it's one of those days where it is just backed up in the lobby. I don't want them to feel that frustration and that, well, I came in, they were busy, I give up.
Yeah.
Because they always have the option of having an officer respond to their residents, to their place of work, if they can't miss work, to make that report or have that contact with the officer too. So maybe just because this seemed like it was gonna be the convenient answer at the time and it didn't work out that way, I don't want them to walk away without the service that they were looking for.
So if they feel uncomfortable in the lobby giving that report, do you take them to an interview room or somewhere if they ask for one?
Yes, that's it. That's
they-
always an option and I've done that myself. So-
And especially certain types of reports.
Reports, okay.
Obviously, there are some reports that need a little bit more privacy. And a lot of those reports are referred to a detective
Right.
right then and there. So they would have access to their own cubicles and interview rooms and et cetera.
Okay, that's good to hear. Yes, Karen?
I've certainly been at the front desk many times, haven't ever looked at it from your lens in terms of just writing reports, but often it's not necessarily backed up, but there's somebody on the phone. And I know that customer service is a big priority right now for us citywide. What kind of training do they get about customer service and handling a front desk and multiple line phone?
Well, it's the same training as any other law enforcement officer that we have as far as customer service and being courteous and things like that, because the officer at the front desk is going to provide that citizen the same level of a trained officer as the officer responding to their residents. So the same things apply, the same.
It's not the same.
Yeah, I got your question. Let me jump in.
I do.
Yeah, let me jump in here. I think there is no specific training to,
Right.
Your question was what training do officers get to handle a multi-line phone? I don't know if
And a
there's.
window, and a
Yeah,
front
I don't know
desk
if there
at the
is specific training to that aspect, because a lot of those officers, that's one of the assignments they do all the time. So I think that the reality of that is I don't know if there's specific training. There is specific policies and there is practice, but do we have specific front reception training on how to deal with multiple phones? I don't think that's necessarily the case.
That's why I asked.
Yeah.
And as we're looking at customer service as well as things for the PD,
Sure.
I ran an office which had either one or two people at the front managing phones, 10 lines for 4 offices and 20 people. There is simple training that you get for customer service. For instance, one of the things, and it's much better in my opinion, I'm just in and out occasionally, generally not with a police report, but for a meeting, needing to just say, get to the front of the line so somebody can tell the chief's office that I'm there to visit with the chief, that kind of thing. Simply learning some fundamentals about making eye contact with people so that you recognize that they're there. Some of the officers in the past anyway, if they're on the phone, their way of handling their focus is never to look up. And I think that's improved, but learning how to handle multiple lines so that you actually say, excuse me just a second, you answer a phone and you say, can I put you on hold please, and then park it, so that the person knows instead of it just ringing and finally hanging up, things like that. They're fairly standard, fairly simple.
Yeah, I think it's
But
an
it might
interesting.
help
I think it's an
management.
interesting point, but I think we could do a very short power DMS video on how to do that. But I think it's important to note that it's an officer who's there a lot is going to be a lot better at managing that phone, just like officers and other specialized things. This is just one of the many things that we ask our
Exactly.
police officers to do.
One of the things we've been talking about is the lens of the citizen
Sure.
and the lens of the community. And so I was just sharing that both from being that person, but also
Sure.
it is possible to do some fairly straightforward training, and if everybody's going to have an opportunity, it actually gets back to managing their own phones and their messages and returning phone calls, and there might be a whole package that we've been kind of easing toward with some of the different things we've talked about that are pretty easy once you say, oh, this is how we do business. Just a thought.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
If I may, to follow up on what Councilmember Hiller said, and I know there's only so many hours that you have available for training. But a cheat sheet or something out there on the desk so that whoever is out there might, you know, just be a reminder while you're out here, because I know that's a rotating assignment.
Right.
Unless it's there for a medical reason or something, but the thing I noticed, and that's a cop in me now, is when I've had this happen to me, much what she described, and an officer would be in there on the phone, and typically it's like this, they're very intent in their conversation, and I'll stand right in front of them, that if they have any peripheral vision, they should be able to see me there. And I often think, well, if it was a bad guy, it'd be pretty easy for me to take care of this officer here, because he doesn't even acknowledge that I'm here. And I think, I understand that you're intent on taking that report, but you have to still be aware of your surroundings. It's easy enough to say, I'll just be a second, and at least you've acknowledged them. And I've looked at it both from a customer side and from the police side. I think, I don't like anybody coming up on me without me acknowledging that or letting them know that I've seen them. And I think maybe the officers get so intent on listening to that phone that they forgot that basic police practice of.
Yeah. It's probably something to do with it being a little bit more complacent here in the LEC behind the protective barriers.
But people come into the law enforcement centers, not here,
Sure.
but across the country, and attack officers.
Sure, absolutely.
So I think
It's
that's
a
important.
fair point.
Well, just to throw in on that, I mean, that's what we do at home, so our kids don't bother us when we're on the phone, right? You just refuse.
Again, to that, circling around to that point, that we are people too. There's
Oh,
no
yeah.
doubt about it.
Go ahead, Captain. I don't know if we're gonna get
Yeah, if you
through
want to move to the next slide, and I'll try to cruise through this. You'll see up there on the screen, I won't read through all of them, but some of the types of reports that we take at the front desk, and you'll see kind of the common trend there is you'll see limited, no or limited suspect information on a lot of those. So in other words, it's not incredibly actionable right at that moment. So it's the type of reports that the officer can take, get the basic information, then if there's follow-up needed, that can be done at a later time. The next slide. So there was a comment or question about the online reporting. So first of all, I just wanted to make sure that we put that up there, how it's accessed. On the Topeka's website, you'll see the red button in the upper right-hand corner, as well as some other contact information. But you click on the File a Police Report online, and it'll take you to the next screen. If you want to go to the next slide. And then you can just simply click the green button and you start a report. So crimes that can be reported online, minor non-felony crimes, reports required for insurance claims, reports required for reimbursement claims, lost funds, minor thefts, crimes that cannot be reported online, felonious crimes, violent crimes, or crimes of a sexual nature. Obviously, those are going to require a much more in-depth investigation and response on the front end. So that's why that is discouraged on an online reporting.
Can I ask a question? How does that seem to work? We've been working on another committee about broadband and just access to computers and comfort with computers and so on. Does this seem to be working for all citizens, or just some people and not other people?
Well, it's hard to gauge. I mean, the last slide in the presentation, there's some numbers on there, but in 2020, we received 1,111 online reports through that system.
I mean, obviously, there's limitations, as you just pointed out, to
Sure,
people who have
yeah.
access.
Well, you would hear about it, I would think, and maybe
Yeah.
we would too, if people said, well, that's all fine, but I don't, or I can't do that on my cell phone, or
And I
just
think,
wondered.
yeah, and I think
It's not a
it's,
complaint that I hear that we have a lot.
yeah, and it's just another layer in us being, out there and reachable to the citizens. I mean, they can always pick up the phone and an officer responds for that report.
Okay.
Or they can come into the front desk and make that report. Or they can click on the button on the internet and make the report. We just want those layers available to our citizens to
Which is
be,
great.
obtainable, so.
You almost have to have some kind of online option now for
These
just
days.
about everything that we do. So police report would make sense as well.
Well, as long as that, and I obviously I don't file them very often, I just hear it. And so, As long as everybody has a means to do it, for those that have computers, that makes it quick, they can do it 24/7,
Sure.
it's great. I just was wondering
Yeah.
if it was
It's a
working.
great way to avoid lines or waiting
absolutely.
periods and those kind of things.
Sure.
I have a question. I've never done it. I think that's cool that you can do that. But thinking of other things that I've done where you do it online, you get a confirmation email or something from that business or company. Is that part of this, so that so I know that my report was in fact
Yeah, if you want to
received
go to
in the
the,
system?
go to the next slide. So
Okay.
this will, let's kind of go through this briefly, how this works. Because yes, you will get a generated number
Okay,
that correlates with this. But it is important to know, and it's for several reasons, hard to describe or hard to explain in a short period of time. But the citizen isn't going online and filling out a Kansas Standard offense report and receiving a assigned case number, department case number, because there has to be some eyes-on filtering involved to make sure what is coming in meets the criteria for that report.
By sworn law enforcement.
Correct. So, but yes, they do get a number, a case number, if you will, that's generated by this. It's just not a Kansas Standard Offense or department-generated case number that we normally think of.
like an incident number.
Correct. So this comes in a very simple form, and this is just one little section. I snapped a picture up there, the kind of the start of it. But it's actually a woo-foo by SurveyMonkey, so it's a click the box and fill in a short description and basic information. So how this works though is it's submitted online. Our criminal investigations administrative sergeant views all of those, all 1,111 of those last year, just as part of one of his duties. And basically that first set of eyes is to see, okay, where does this need to go? What's the topic? So then that gets sent to the proper Criminal Investigations Bureau sergeant, property, financial, whatever it may be. So then the second layer in that is that sergeant reviews the report in its entirety to see if, is this criminal in nature? Is this something that's even a reportable offense? We get some things sent to us that aren't even, they really have nothing to do with the police department, so to speak. So they see what it was to it. So then the relevant reports are distributed to the sergeants, and they apply solvability factors to those. And cases are assigned or not assigned based on those solvability factors. So we'll briefly go through that. If you go to the next slide. It's important, when we're talking about solvability factors, I'll provide a couple details on those. But just know that is not a Topeka Police Department term. That's kind of as we discussed, an industry standard. That those are applied to cases when you're trying to do case screening and decide how to assign them and what resources get assigned to them. Solvability factors are a big part in that filtering system. So the case screening, this comes right out of our investigative services policy.
Quick question
Yes.
while you're right there. So if the complaint is filed and it has a number from the person, but if it's determined that its solvability factor is too low, does it ever even become a case? Or it's just a report?
It can be converted into a incident report. It can be converted into a offense report that may get some follow-up, may not get much follow-up depending on the solvability. There's a lot of possibilities there. The ones that aren't criminal in nature and really weren't a report that should have been filed, that's where it stops. It's reviewed by that first sergeant. It's reviewed by that second sergeant if the nature of that report fits that sergeant's area. But then it may stop there if it's not even criminal in nature. That's one example. There's a lot of them that are converted into either a actual department incident report or a Kansas Standard Offense report. So solvability factors, according to the nature and seriousness of the case, investigative priorities and amount of readily available information, the need for additional investigative work, availability of agency resources, and other factors relevant to the department's mission. That's just a little snippet out of policy. So these are the primary solvability factors identified in our policy. Witnesses or victims who can identify the suspect with a great degree of probability. Obviously that places it high on the solvability factor when you have a witness involved or the victim's able to identify the suspect. Arrest made or suspect identified by name or associations. The suspect vehicle description by tag number, vehicle identification number, or unusual identifiers. Recoverable, traceable, stolen property, or significant physical evidence. So those are the whole list of secondary solvability factors, but those are primary solvability factors that really put that report actionable, and we're able to assign that out and get movement on it in a
So if it's
fairly
my
rapid manner.
neighbor was standing on their front porch waving a gun in the air,
Mhm. That's, if we get a,
Your neighbor's a suspect who's been identified.
Right.
So that would be an assigned report.
right.
well, but it might make a difference if I knew my neighbor was a felon or I didn't know anything.
And that's part of the assignment and the follow-up. So then that's what we're talking about with the solvability factors, is that makes that high in a solvability factor. If you make a report, whether online or wherever, that, my neighbor was out doing this is my neighbor's name, or I think this is his name, or his last name is this, then
But
follow.
even if he didn't shoot it. he
Sure.
would still-
Were you afraid by him waving it around?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That could be aggravated assault then.
And
Not a criminal offense.
it could,
Okay.
it could, elicit like the question you just asked, can they even possess one? And that's a fairly,
And there's good intelligence that
Quick
comes out of a lot of
follow,
the online reports, even if it's not a criminal nature. I mean, there's an intelligence piece to this too that we're probably not gonna touch on today too much. so.
Well, that's important to my people,
Sure.
of course, so I.
Sure.
Yeah.
just- and I don't know
Absolutely.
the answers.
yeah, those things are followed up on
Right.
in layers and more times than people are aware
That
of.
administrative sergeant will filter out the criminal intelligence stuff and send it to the criminal intelligence unit though.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
You can move to that next slide. So then, just to kind of, wrap up on the customer service side, I think, it's, the chief and I talked about this earlier in the week, and it's one of those things that we kind of decided on, that we always strive for excellence, and we want to achieve perfection, and we're not going to achieve perfection. So we fully understand the frustration when sometimes that return phone call doesn't come back as quickly as the citizen wants it to. I don't think we miss the mark too often, but we do. We do miss the mark sometimes on promptness and things like that. That's full disclosure. But it's important that, to know that we are busy and we are working through a lot of things. 90,000 calls for service last year. We generated 17,911 Kansas Standard Offense reports last year. 4,423 arrests, and like I mentioned earlier, the 1,111 online reports. I hear the frustration and I feel the frustration when a citizen doesn't get that, and we hope that it doesn't happen very often. We don't want it to happen very often. We don't want it to ever happen. But when it does, we want it brought to our attention. When it's brought to my attention, that phone call's made that day, so.
I think part of the part of it's training and understanding you know, every phone call that's not returned probably generates, and many of them generate 5 other phone calls because the people start calling around. And then they call their council member, and then they call the city manager's office, and they call the city council office. And it is so valuable and cost-effective and time-effective. And then they have to call the chief, the sergeant, you know, all of a sudden it took 7 people
Yeah.
to handle that one short phone call, whether it was a crisis or just an inquiry. And I, in my experience anyway, when the staff really understands that, then it's instinctive instead of, and it's easy. It becomes easy, and it really does make life a lot easier and save
Yes.
a lot of
Yeah,
wear and tear.
when the captain has to track you down to return a phone call, I promise you I take that as an educational moment for that detective or
Exactly.
officer.
That's not good.
Exactly.
He remembered
Oh,
apparently.
Uh-oh.
Probably both sides of that, as a captain and, yeah.
We've all been there.
Okay. Well, we have all been there.
Yes.
So hopefully I hit on the, you know, the points and some of the procedures, provided some clarification on, you know, how that front desk works, how those online reports work, how some of that follow-up works. I know we did that really quick, but I did want to provide a little clarification on those discussion points.
And we appreciate the feedback. I think that's some great ideas that we wouldn't
Yeah.
think about a
Yeah.
little quick cheat sheet or a training video. That's absolutely something we can do.
Oh, and with the extensions on it, you know, that's the part of the cheat sheet we would keep, you know, the frequent referrals, because
Right.
people turn over. You got your little worn out,
Yeah.
probably still piece of paper.
Just send it all to the chief's office, right? Is it-
Well, that could be the protocol if the front desk is that busy, if there's somebody else that can do that.
Sure.
You just have to be there.
What I will do is I will put in our next agenda, continue conversation on this, so we can just kind of make sure that we hit on everything.
Sure.
If you guys don't mind. You might get home and think of something, because it's after 5. Is there anything else that needs to come before this meeting?
I don't think so. I think, thank you for being here. Appreciate the invitation you had sent out to Dr. Anderson and John Nave. I think it was good to have them here.
Yes, very good meeting. I did send out an email. I think we're getting to the end of our list. I know Karen had questioned, like, what are you talking about, lady? So if there's anything else that the committee would like to, I've got a few things on my list. If there's anything else that you would like to talk about, or Chief, that you would like to bring forward, please get a hold of me so I can set it on our agenda, and make sure we have that. I'll send out another reminder, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Anything
I
else?
think you've done a great job of walking us through steps, and, you know, whenever there's time to look at that list and kind of go, I think we're even resolving some of those things as we go along, which
Yes.
is pretty cool.
Yes.
To be able to go check, or, well, like qualified immunity that you had, if, you know, it would be helpful for us to be thinking about it, because, for instance, if there are things in the contract or in policy that need to be addressed, we're in contract right now, so we want to not overlook some of those things as the year progresses, but it
Right.
seems like we are getting some of those things
And
just
those
done.
are coming. I just want to make sure that if there's something out there that you want to talk about, that I'm not forgetting.
Mhm.
And so that's why I'm kind of sending out that reminder list to you guys.
Yeah.
Because I think we have hit on a lot of stuff in different areas and different ways, but there's just a little bit more work to do.
I think
Oh,
so.
yeah.
Okay? That said, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Friday?
It is Friday. Much better.